Hello, and welcome to the TDSB Parent and Community Office Engagement Office webinar series for school councils. This is webinar number 3, Effective School Councils. Previous webinars have been on bylaws and school council basics. They can be found at the Parent and Community Engagement Office page of TDSB. My name is Nancy Angevine Sands. I'm a family engagement consultant. I work with educators and parents to create effective homeschool engagement opportunities. So let's get started. This webinar will be available on the PCEO YouTube page. To protect your privacy, visual contributions by viewers will not be possible. On the right-hand side of the page, hopefully you will see a chat box. At the conclusion, I'll answer any questions that appear there. Unfortunately, in the past, I've not been able to access the chat box. And if this happens, please feel free to go to my withequalstep@gmail.com that you see down here at the bottom of the page and send me your questions, and I will try to answer them on air in the time that we have left. All of these webinars have been designed to meet accessibility guidelines. So before we move on, let's begin with our eye on the ball guy. He's been with us in the previous seminars, and he's there to remind us that the school council mandate is to support pupil achievement. And the second mandate is to make the system accountable to parents. And everything that you do with your council should be reflective of those two things, particularly the supporting pupil achievement. Here we go. We're going to begin with effective meetings, and then we're going to look at committees and finally communication and volunteers. So let's just go through a few basic points about effective meetings for the council. Of course, you want to keep accurate minutes that are then distributed not only to your members, but are also made available to your parent body. Now, to the parent community as a whole, that can mean posting it on the school's web page. It can mean putting it on the bulletin board in your school. Hopefully every school council has a bulletin board. Or it can mean having a binder in the office and letting your community know that that's where they can find the minutes. You'll hold annual elections as prescribed by the regulations, and we talked about how elections in previous webinars. You also want to use effective communication strategies, and as I said, we're going to talk about that a little further on. You want to maintain up-to-date workable bylaws, and you should have, or at least work from, a written code of conduct. The TDSB Code of Conduct can be found at this link, and it can be found on page 3 and 4 of that link. And you can go back into the archived portion of this and write down that if you can't get it now. I want to talk for a minute or two about minutes and agendas. No personal items may be addressed at a council meeting. If someone has a particular problem or issue that's happening with their child, they can't come and ask for a solution at the council meeting. However, they may talk about the issue on a broader scale. So for example, if a parent is concerned about, let's say discipline and how discipline is being meted out in their classroom, you can talk about the role of discipline, the various forms of what type of discipline do they use, and what should students expect and what should parents expect. There should be a consistency in the operation of the meeting. For example, do you make decisions following Robert's Rules of Order or consensus? For those of you who don't aren't sure about the difference, let me take a minute to explain. Robert's Rules of Order is more of a formal way of operating and decision making. It involves having having motions made and seconded, and then once the motion is put forward and seconded by somebody else, then discussion takes place, and then there's a call for a vote, and you vote, record the results of that vote, and the decision is made. In consensus building, you talk and work around in the group until everybody or the majority of people come to a consensus about what they want to do. One is obviously more formal than the other. Sometimes councils will use both types, but you really have to think about this very clearly, because you don't want it to be seen as you using one when it's to the advantage of the council and another when it's not to their advantage. So try to be quite transparent and accountable in how you make your decisions. The minutes should be accurate, neutral, summarize the main points of the meeting, and indicate if any actions are taken. There's lots of good examples online about minutes. You don't need to say, he said this, and then she said that, and then this one agreed with that, and that one disagreed. You just have to say, if, for example, if you're using motions, this is the motion, who presented it, who seconded it. You might want to make what the main point in favor of that motion was, and perhaps the main point against that motion, and then what the result of the vote was, or the result of the consensus. And if any actions, if it results in actions to be taken, what those actions are and when they should be expected to be completed. The agenda and minutes should be made available to the community. Again, they can be posted on your bulletin board. They can be put up on the school or the council's website. They can be in a binder in the office, but they have to be kept for 4 years. The same is true of your financial records. So, what can the chair do to make sure that the school council meetings are effective? As I've said, post the agenda several days in advance of the meeting. And the chair, as I've said in a previous webinar, the chair is responsible for creating the agenda, but he or she should do it with input from their various committees and from the principal. And they should also be open to either members of the council or parents at large who want to bring something up to the council and would like to see it on the agenda. Try to make, if you put a call out for agenda items about 7 to 10 days before the meeting, that should give you more than enough time to create the agenda, check with the principal if there's anything that he or she thinks is necessary to be on the agenda, and then post it so that everybody knows what's going to be discussed at the meeting. As the meeting begins, you might want to remind your participants of the rules of order that you've established and voted on, and try to follow them as closely as you can. Start and end the meeting on time. That's really important for those of us who are sitting at the meetings. Keep your opening remarks brief, outlining what is to be done in the time allowed. I want to take a moment to just emphasize now, I quite often will urge all of the reports, the chair's report, the principal's report, the teacher's report. Yes, teachers may be doing reports and should be doing reports, reports from any of your committees, that written reports be handed in ahead of time and be made available with the agenda when it goes out. The advantage of this is that everyone can read what the report is ahead of time, can think about it, and can create any questions that they may have about that report. The aim here is to cut down the business time of the council meeting and make it a little bit more interesting and bearable for those who are there. I'm sure many of you are like me. I've lost whole hours of my life at council meetings, which I will never get back, because of reports that go on and on and on and on. If you get the report written, for example, if the principal writes their report, and it doesn't have to be in sentences, point form is fine. If the principal writes the report, it goes out with the agenda, everybody reads it. Then at the meeting, he or she can take their time to emphasize one or two of the points in their report that they think is really important, or that they think may best be open for discussion from everyone there. And this allows more time for questions. It allows more time for sharing of ideas and opinions. The chair should often summarize the main points of an item that's been discussed, especially one where if there's a motion being put forward or an idea that has to be voted on through vote or consensus, and there's been a wide range of discussion, the chair should summarize the main points that have been discussed and decided on before moving on to the next item, or perhaps before calling for the vote or the consensus. Keep to the agenda and timelines. Some councils will put timelines for each item on the agenda. This is going to be 5 minutes. This is going to be 10 minutes. That takes a lot of experience to do, and because you don't want to underestimate how much time an item may take, and you don't want members or any parents that are there to feel that they've been cut off. So sometimes you may want to do timelines for individual items, but sometimes you may just want to keep your eye on the clock and know that you're going to end at a certain time and judge accordingly as you go through your agenda. During discussions, keep a speakers list and try to be sure that no one monopolizes the floor. And I'm going to admit that the times that I was a school council chair, I think I found this to be one of my most difficult jobs, was to make sure that each speaker had an equal amount of time to speak. Sometimes someone would get up and they would have a really good point and they would be speaking really well, and you would tend to lose track of the time they were speaking. And then the next person would get up and, bless them, they might be droning on a little bit, and you as a chair would want to cut them off because you saw the discussion going nowhere. That makes your job a little bit difficult. You can acknowledge that to your members and say, I'm doing my best, and it would be very helpful to me if you would be concise in what you're saying. And that brings us to the members and the participants. What can they do? Well, they can agree to address one item at a time and not go off on to different points when they get up to speak. They can agree to speak briefly and to the point, to strive to create an atmosphere of respect and trust and acceptance. You don't have to agree with everything that everyone else says, but you should respect their right to say it. Trust that they have the best interests of the school and the students at heart, and accept their right to be able to say what they want to say in an atmosphere of respect. And agree to resolve issues in a reasonable time frame. And sometimes this isn't possible. So acknowledge that if you can't resolve an issue, that you will table it for the next meeting. I know that sometimes this may not sound like the best idea because you need to have something decided now because the next meeting is another 4 or 6 weeks and you don't want to wait. So that goes back to being respectful of everybody and everybody being on the same page. Back to eye on the ball. We're here for our students. Let's keep that in mind. We're not here to have one side or the other win in the battle. Let's open our hearts. As I say in mindfulness, let's open our hearts to the best wishes of everyone there and try to resolve this issue. And now we're going to move on to committees. Committees provide the opportunity for parents who are not council members to have some role in decision making. In the previous webinars, I've talked about how Regulation 612 is quite clear that every parent in the school is not a member of council. You have to have a select number that appear in your bylaws, and that's the number that you elect or appoint each year. Now, sometimes for schools that are moving from a practice of every parent is a member to a practice of only certain parents are members, there's a feeling that this will lessen the voice of the parents. And that's not true. And that's where committees come in, because committees are where a lot of decision making and research and work is done. So let's look how the best way for them to operate. So why do we have committees? Well, the responsibilities are shared. Not all of the work is done by council members. Not all of the work is done at council. More parents are able to be involved. Your council may only allow for 10 or 15 members. If you have committees doing your work, you can have at least 10 or 15 parents or more involved in your various committees. It sometimes allows you to look for parents who have specialized skill sets. If you are doing, let's say, a gardening, you have a committee to look at gardening, you may want to go out and find parents in your community who are landscape artists or who are gardeners or who just like to do it because that's what they enjoy, and encourage them to come on and share their skills and what they know best. It provides an opportunity for members of the committee to gain confidence in their skills. And if they serve on committees and they like it and they feel fulfilled and they feel that, hey, I've got something to offer to the school, you've increased the number of parents that you can go to and ask if they would consider running for council in the future. So it's sort of what's the word? You're building confidence, you're building skills, you're building your base for possible future councils. At committee, matters may be examined in detail. We've all sat at council meetings where we've gone around and around and around on issues, and then we go on to the next topic, and away we go again. If the majority of work is done in committee, those matters can be discussed by a smaller group in that specific setting, because that's all they have to look at. And when you do all of these things, your council becomes more efficient because you're not debating what you should be doing at council. The committee comes, and we're going to look at this in a minute, committee comes with the ideas, and then council votes on what the committee has recommended. So remember, this is very important to remember. It is the responsibility of the school council to define the committee purpose, the limitations, and the responsibilities. It is not the responsibility of the council to decide that, right? And this is because the final decisions are made at council, not at committee. It's the responsibility of the council to set the terms of reference. Is it included in the bylaws? Is it a standing committee? We're going to talk about this in a minute. Or is it a motion that's created to form the committee as a one-off? It's also the council's responsibility to ensure that the committees report to the council on a regular basis. This is the job primarily of the chair or the co-chair or the vice chair. If you have a vice chair, this is a good job for the vice chair, that their responsibility is to keep in contact with all of their councils, make sure that they're running properly, make sure that they're on time for what their mandate was, and that they have a report ready when necessary at a council meeting. Let me take this moment to say that committees do not have to report at every council meeting. They may have 4 months to come up with what their mandate is. And in the first month, they may have nothing to report. And that's perfectly all right. And finally, as I said, final decisions are made by the council based on the recommendations of the committee. So let's take a moment to look at the different types of committees. There are 2 types of committees. There's a standing committee and the ad hoc. The standing committee should be listed in your bylaws, and they should be only committees that you know are going to exist every single year. And so it would be something like your budget committee. That should exist every year in every school council. You might feel that communication would be something that you would like to see every school council have a committee to look after. Now, so you have to, when you're writing your bylaws, think very, very, very carefully what standing committees you want to put in, because as I said in the webinar on bylaws, if it's in the bylaws, it has to happen. If you mention a committee in your bylaws, it must be there. So be very careful. Your community right now may feel that something is really important, but you have to think in 3 or 4 years, as our community changes and grows, would this still be important? If you put a committee into your bylaws that in the future doesn't need to be there, then you have to take it out via an amendment. And we talked about amendments in the bylaws webinar. The second type of committee is an ad hoc committee. And these committees do not appear in your bylaws. They're created by council as needed. I've given some examples here. Let's say you want to have a workshop on literacy and you want to have a committee look at what it would look like, talk to teachers, find speakers, set up how it's going to be operated. Then you would set up a committee for that purpose. It's going to last a finite amount of time. It's going to do a finite job. And when that job is completed, it is going to disband. There are some schools that have garden committees. And I use this a lot. I don't know why. But, and you may have had a garden committee at your school for the past 5 or 6 years. I still wouldn't suggest making it a standing committee because you may run out of gardeners in a couple of years and nobody's interested in it. So that's there as an example of something that seems really important now. Think about the people who are coming after you. So what are the responsibilities of the committee chair? Well, the committee chair has to ensure that the members understand the purpose and the expectations of the committee as set out by the school council when it established that committee. Even if it's a standing committee, it should still, the council should say each year, this is what we want you to do. And in your bylaws, when you mention the committee, if you think there are some things that you think are really important that committee do every year, you might want to mention it in your bylaws. The chair should discuss the individual members' expectations. Members may agree to join a committee with an idea of what that committee would be doing. And at the first meeting or a couple meetings, you should be talking about that and just make sure that you're all on the same page, because we know when we're all on the same page, we accomplish more. The chair has to prepare and present committee reports at council meetings. Again, I suggest written reports that are sent out along with the agenda, but you would also have to present what your ideas, if you've come up with, if you're just saying this is what we've done this month and we don't have any recommendations yet, that might be all that you need to do. But if with the report comes a recommendation which the council has to make a decision on, you may also need to make a report and lead any discussion that it comes up around that, answer any questions. The chair also sets the agendas for the meetings, calls the meetings, solicit input from all members. Committee meetings do not have to occur at the school. They can occur other places, but please, I ask you, if you set up a meeting at another place, please make sure that all of the members of the committee are comfortable going to that place. There may be some members who are new to the school, don't know everyone, and feel uncomfortable, for example, going to somebody's house that they don't know. So while it may be preferable to other members of the committee to meet at someone's house, if it's not all right for everybody, then please don't do it. We don't want to turn off our volunteers. We don't want to lose our volunteers. We want to value and respect respect their needs and their wants. As you start to know each other and work together, then there may be more possibilities of where you could meet. Committees report directly to the council chair. Your written report should contain the main options you considered and why the recommendations for action. Please be concise. Don't go on and on in the report, but this is, we looked at, let's say you're going to do a committee on a literacy workshop. We considered possibility A, possibility B, possibility C. We've decided on we're recommending that we do B, and here is why we decided on that. And then leave it, the chair of the committee then, if you're working from motions, would make a motion that the council would then vote on. And again, I'm going to say it again, the reports are included in the agenda. So engagement, many researchers say, begins and ends with relationships. It's relationships, relationships, relationships. And relationships begin with effective two-way communication. And I want to emphasize here two-way. So why is communication important? Well, it helps us to keep our families informed and connected to what we're doing. And it also helps the council stay connected to their families and understand and know what the families need. Be cautious that you aren't, how much you contact your parents. You don't want to be contacting them all the time. You want that when you send out an email or a text or a Twitter post, that the families are, oh, here's something from the council. This must be important. You don't want to think, oh, geez, they're writing me again. All right. You want them to pay attention to it. Create whatever form of communication you use, create methods to hear back from the parents, to hear from them, and ensure that what you hear back influences the work you're going to do going forward. If your families think that you're only yap, yap, yap at them, then they're going to lose interest in what you have to say. Or if they're able to answer back, to give their ideas, to give their thoughts, but they feel that it goes nowhere, they're going to stop replying, just as any of us would when we're talking to someone. So make sure when you hear back from your parents, how's that going to influence what you do going forward? And I suggest that you send at least some of your communications out in the top 2 or 3 languages of the school. This is available in the office through the school census. Every principal knows what their top languages are. You can have this, through the Parent and Community Engagement Office, you can find a translator, and you stick with that translator. You can pay for their services out of the $1.25 per student that you get on budget line 41,500. You can also use it with the $500 that you receive on the same budget line, 41,500, from the province. This has been mentioned in previous webinars. You get, let me just repeat that, you get $1.25 per student from the board, to a minimum of $300 and a maximum of $1,000. Plus you get $500 from the ministry. So you have between $800 and $1,500, depending on the population of your school, to reach out to parents to do council work. All of that money, not all of that money, some of that money can be used for translation, and it can be used for interpretation if you need that at your meetings or any events. So we all know there's lots of ways to communicate, and let's just look at them for a moment. Email, this should be one of your jobs, is all year long, is to collect email addresses. Quite often schools will send something out at the beginning of the year asking for the school to have the email addresses. You could ask permission of your principal if you could include a notification in that package that goes home, asking the parent for permission to use their email address, guaranteeing that it will only, and this is very important, guaranteeing that it will only be used for school council business, and that it will not be shared beyond the chair and the communications chair. You can collect those addresses at every event. You should have a table at every event. You can stand and collect it there. You can put out a campaign that in the first couple of months, school council members are walking around with a clipboard, going old school, and collect email addresses that way as well. Then you can make a list. You could use Google Lists or some other form that you may be aware of that will allow you to adjust every year. The grade 1 list becomes the grade 2 list, becomes the grade 3 list. The graduating class, those emails drop off. This, I'm going to admit, is a really big job. To collect and record all of your emails is a really big job. But it's really important too, because it gives you an opportunity to connect with your families in an easy and well-used way. And I'll take this moment to urge all school councils to get the school council email that is made available. You can find more information about it on the PIAC website, I believe. And you can also ask, you have to do it through your principal, and they'll go through the IT department. They get notification every September. This is a great way for the Parent Community Engagement Office to stay in touch with you. And because you have the same pattern of email address, for you to network with other councils in your community and across the board. Okay, other ways of communication, Twitter. Twitter's a great way to send out announcements, to let people know what's going on in the school, in the class, with the council, to gather ideas. You can use Facebook. I strongly suggest, in fact, I believe it's a requirement that you have a moderator for both your Twitter and Facebook page. It's someone who is going to look at it on almost a daily basis and remove anything that goes up that is contrary to the code of conduct and the social media code of conduct of the board, which you can also find online at you go into social media code of conduct. You can have a website or have the school's website. All school websites have a page for parents and school councils, and you can post information there. And as I said at the beginning, a school bulletin board is a great way to make your presence known to anybody who walks down the hall and sees a bulletin board. Make it fun, make it bright, change it around every so often so that people know this is a place for me to go and find out stuff that's going to help me support my kid and help my child in their learning. And finally, please remember that you must have permission to include photos of adults and children. This may be part of what you send home at the beginning of the year, asking for permission for emails. But if you don't have written permission, then you cannot include, you have to ensure that their faces are not present in any photos that you post online. I should have included Instagram there too. Okay, let's take a minute and look at volunteers. I hear a lot when I'm out with school councils that, oh, we just can't get any volunteers. And I recognize that it's a really, really difficult job. So before I go into it, I'm going to urge you, sometimes the best way to get a volunteer is face-to-face, is to go up to someone right in their face and say, look, we really need volunteers for this particular job. Would you be interested? This is what's involved and how long you'd have to do it. Could you help me in any way? Or ask people who are volunteers to bring along a friend. So let's look at some of the steps to getting volunteers. Number one, collect contact information, especially emails, of anybody who says, yeah, I'll volunteer for things at the school. Again, you could begin with the information you send home at the beginning of the year, or in a survey that you might send home hard copy or electronically. And Google does great surveys. Google surveys a great way to do it. SurveyMonkey. It could be one of your questions. Would you be willing to volunteer for something at the school? And then list a couple of examples of things where you need volunteers, not just school council events, right? Our teachers need volunteers sometime. So survey your teachers and say, where do you anticipate that you would need volunteers throughout the year? When would you need them? How often would you need them? What would be the time frame? So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Make the list of volunteers needed and keep that list. And you might want to have a volunteer committee to do that. Then make a list of where you're going to need those volunteers. So as I said, you go to your teachers and you say, where will you need volunteers this year? You go to your various, if you know there are things that are going to be happening, if you have a committee that's organizing an event, you go to them and you say, what volunteers would you need? That may automatically be a part of the purpose that the council and the guidelines that the council uses when they set up a mandate for a committee, that they must report to the volunteer committee what volunteers they will need. So now you've got a list of people who have volunteered, said that they would be volunteers, and told you some of the things they might be interested in doing. You have a list of the jobs that need volunteers. You put them together and you train your volunteers. Sometimes this is just a matter of sitting down and saying, yeah, you're going to work the bake table at the fun fair, and you're going to be there from 10 till 4, and you're just going to hand out you're just going to sell whatever's for sale at the bake table. Sometimes if it's working in a classroom, you're going to need information from the teacher about what it is. We feel better and more confident when we are doing a job that we understand, when we're doing a job that we've been trained for. And if you want to keep your volunteers, You need to make sure they're happy. And part of that is giving them the training. No surprises. No surprises. They know what's expected of them and who expects it. Keep in touch with your volunteers, whether it's a one-day event or whether it's something that they're volunteering for over a longer period of time, and ask them, how's it going? And volunteer committees, this includes the volunteers that sit on your committees. Those people are volunteers. Ask them, how's it going? Now, you're not looking for them to badmouth anybody. You're just saying, are you happy? Did you get the proper training? Is there anything you need? At the end, how was that experience? Could we make it better in some way? What are your suggestions? If we wanted to do this again, what would you say that we needed to do? And then when it's over, give them some love. Volunteers, everybody wants to be thanked for what they've done and appreciated. So, you can do it immediately afterwards with a thank you note or a thank you phone call, or some schools hold volunteer teas or volunteer lunches at some point towards the end of the year. You don't have to go that far, but you want to make the person who gave of themselves and their time to feel valued and appreciated. Dr. Steve Constantino is a researcher on school council, on parent engagement. And he said that parents engage when the information, organization, or situation is meaningful and relevant to them. If we are not able to engage, remember, if you're on the school council, you are already engaged. All right? You are already engaged, but it doesn't mean that everyone around you in your community is. If you're having trouble engaging families, then you need to figure out, is what we're offering them meaningful and relevant to them? Not, it ought to be, but is it? And if it isn't, and we're keeping our eye on the ball, what do we have to do to make it more meaningful and more relevant to them? And when we do that, we will be able to engage our parents. So now I'm going to go to the question and answer part of this. I'm just checking my notes to make sure I've told you everything I wanted you to do. I did want to say one last thing. 50 years of research in family engagement has told us that when families are engaged in learning and in their children's learning, that is what has an impact on student achievement. It's the most effective thing that a council can do is to build the capabilities of their families to support learning at home. We have to start doing for our families and for our students and not worry so much about doing for the school. When we begin to do more for our families, when there is a purpose and a reason, when what we're doing is meaningful to our families, then they will turn around and begin to help us. They will begin to be more willing to do for the school. So I am going to urge you to put your efforts less towards fundraising to meet the needs and the wish lists of the schools, and to take that time, that effort, and yes, those funds, and put it towards engaging your families. Because again, if we have our eye on the ball, it's about student achievement. So let's go to the questions. This is the part I hate the most. There we go. All right. I had a couple questions that came in while I'm waiting to see any others. I don't see anything in my chat box. Sorry. I don't know if anyone's writing it, and it's just me and my stupid chat box. So I'll answer a couple of the questions that have come in ahead of time. How should councils find a way to include all parents who are interested? So I hope that I answered that question through my talk about committees. Not everybody can sit on the executive, or sit on as a member of council. Not everybody, if we're lucky, not everybody that wants to be a member of council will be elected to do so. And I know there's many of you out there saying, you mean there's school councils where not everybody gets elected? Yes, there is, and that's what we're all aiming for, isn't it? So if you are a school council that's lucky enough to have more people running to be a member than there are positions, keep those people that don't make it and get them on your committees. Anybody can chair a committee. It doesn't have to be a member of council that chairs the committee. Normally, I would suggest your budget committee is chaired by your treasurer, but after that, maybe communication chaired by your secretary. But after that, any parent can chair a committee meeting. And as we've looked at, as I've said, the committees do a lot of the work. So it's a really, really important job. It asks about council following rules. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So the code of conduct, I think, is the most important thing to all agree on. And after that, how are you going to make decisions? And that should be something that you talk about, and as a council, that you talk about at the beginning of the year, and try really hard to stick to a particular way of doing it. You want to be, sorry, my thing just shut off. You want to be open and transparent. So try really hard. It's not going to always work. Sometimes things are going to happen. You're going to do something a little differently than you did the meeting before, the 2 meetings before. But try to have some consistency in your practice. How can we get things done outside of formal meetings, which we do not have on a monthly basis? Well, you can't get decisions made outside of formal meetings. You must have, as we discussed at previous webinars, you must have quorum in order to vote or have consensus in decision making. You can discuss, if you don't have quorum, you can discuss it, but you can't make decisions. I don't really like to see decisions made outside of a council meeting, say in a group call and everybody votes on it. That to me isn't as transparent as it should be. Sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes if there's an emergency decision that has to be made, quite often around the expenditure of money, you could do it. But another way for things to be done is at your committee meetings, because that's where you're doing a lot of your work, a lot of your research, and a lot of your voting. Excuse me. In terms of communication, how can we engage parents whose first language isn't English? Well, that's, excuse me a minute. Too much talking. That's where translation and interpretation come in. It's really important that we make all of our families and all of our communities feel welcome. And the best way that I think that you can spend some of that money is to make sure you're translating at least the most important messages that are going out to your families, translating them into your top 3 languages. If you have a lot of members or a lot of parents who are coming out to a meeting who do not speak English, you can also get a translator through the Parent and Community Engagement Office. If you have a settlement worker or you have a CSW that knows a language they could translate, I would be very, very careful in who you get to do interpretation and translation. You want to make sure that they are that they understand the words exactly as they are being translated, and they're not making errors in the translation. I know the Parent and Communication Engagement Office has suggested at some schools where the majority of parents speak a language other than English, that the interpreter interpret into English for the few that don't speak the language, and let the meeting occur in the majority language. I suspect that many of you are watching this are saying, "What?" But we need to make the majority of our parents comfortable and welcomed. And it's not always about having our meetings in the language of the dominant culture. Um, and the question was, the concern was that when they have an interpreter, it takes up a lot of time interpreting the message. The person, I've had interpreters at my workshops, and they just sit beside the person who needs interpretation and talks into their ear. If you know you're going to have a few people who need interpretation, you may need to get more than one interpreter in, so that each one interprets for one or two people at a time, and the meeting can roll on. But it's not a big effort to take some extra time to speak, stop, let the interpretation occur, and then go forward. Because by doing that, you are engaging a family member. You are helping them engage in their kids' education and their child's achievement. And that is the prime mandate of school councils. I'm just looking to see if I have any other emails. Not yet. Nothing's come up on my chat line. Just want to make sure I've told you everything before I end. So if something comes up from this webinar, or from the bylaws webinar, or the school council basics that you have questions on, please feel free to write me at withequalstep@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. The Parent and Community Engagement Office at the TDSB is always there to help you and answer questions. Please, in the work that you are doing, remember our guy with the eye on the ball. We're here for student achievement, and the number one way to do that is to engage our families in learning, and we can do that best by building their capabilities to support their child. Thank you very much for taking part in one or all of these webinars. I hope that they have been of some value to you, and I hope that you will join us again should the Parent and Community Engagement Office have further webinars in the future. Good luck with the rest of the year and your work on council. On behalf of all of our students and our parents, I want to thank you very much for all of the hard work that you do for family engagement in the Toronto District School Board. It's appreciated by our families, and most importantly, it's appreciated by our students. Thank you. Good night.